Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Newtown Podcast. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about diversity in engineering and how it impacts your safety in the Latino community in engineering. And today I'll be going over 5 individuals that really stood out to me. One, because of their story, but also just because of their genius and the inventions and the stuff that went into making it. So let's go ahead and get started. So as we know, engineering is dominated by white males. While this is relatively harmless, it's the lack of diversity that is a little bit dangerous. It's dangerous because of testing and having a lack of testing subjects. So for instance, let's talk about airbags. In the past, airbags have caused injury to women and children because when it was investigated, they found that the safety standard for testing was based on the size and weight of the average male. There was no reference for women and children at the time, and that's particularly insane to think about because, well, when you're testing different materials or products, you're coming through all types of angles, You're going to hit it from the side, you're going to hit it from the front. You're going to do all types of different things to basically make sure that your part is 1, strong, and 2, reliable. When you hear stuff like this happen, you're like, okay, so you'll flip the car over, you'll hit it with a missile, you'll throw it off a cliff, but you're not going to change who's inside. And particularly, what does it mean when another country whose people are smaller than that of what the testing facility is starts using these cars, This impacts, whether or not they're going to buy your car, and 2, this impacts whether or not they're going to live after they crash in it, And it's not even just that. When you look at, companies like HP, in the past they had a racist camera that wouldn't pick up black people because, well, they weren't, when they were testing the camera, they weren't using black skin tones. And so when people who were out of the range of what was normal for this testing came in, they weren't being picked up on the camera, and that's simply because you're not testing with a diverse subject. And when you just think about it, how do you know what's safe around you? Because, they're testing it in such a peculiar way, but they're not testing it in the way that it may matter to you most. That's just insane to think about more and more because that's, I like to be funny thinking about this, but you think when someone's building a car, they would go, oh, I can put my wife and kid in this car. And they never did it. These guys, well, now they're doing it, but it's just, it's insane because, again, how do you know what's safe when you know this now? Genuinely, it's terrifying, but this is why we need more diverse minds and diverse testing subjects. I kind of like to think of it as drinking water through, in a pond as opposed to drinking water on a river, which it sounds a little like, what do you mean by that? Well, one, a pond, if it's stagnant, you got bacteria growing in it. You got all this dirty stuff growing in, the same water. In a river, well, it's just new water coming in. It's different. It's new. It's fresh. It's better for you. There's no bugs. And so that's why I like to think that, when you're testing something, you should test it with as many things as possible, with as many things, or not many things, you know what I mean? With as many variables as you can, because, well, you kind of need to now when you think about it like this. But, let's talk, let's smile for a little bit. I like to smile. I don't want to think about all the nonsense that comes with safety. But yeah, let's go ahead and start on the Latino community in engineering. Now, I'm just going to be giving y'all a rundown of my favorite engineers and what basically they've invented and why it kind of stands out to me in a little bit of their life story. So first up, we're going to go with the inventor of the color TV, Guillermo Gonzalez Camarena. When I was reading on him, he was actually a very interesting individual. As a kid, he enjoyed building electric toys, so much so he even had a laboratory in his basement where he could build this. And he built his first amateur transmitter at the age of 12. That's particularly crazy to think about because he had at least a basic intuition of advanced calculus at age 12. And for reference, I didn't learn calculus until I was about 17, 16, so He has a pretty big head start on a lot of us. Not even just that though. At the age of 17, he built his own specialized television camera. He ended up later becoming an electrical engineer. He studied at the National Polytechnic Institute of Mexico. More specifically, this is what made me pick him, because I didn't know this previously, but he built the color TV. Specifically, he built what was known as the first trichromatic field sequential system. Big words, right? Think about it like this. He had 3 spinning circles of red, green, and blue. And when you spun them a certain way, they made color. He invented the color TV with spinning color circles. It's very interesting to think about. He did this at the age of 23 years old. And then, not just that, but he also built his own camera adapter so that way people can film. They could take their black and white cameras and capture color with it. Like, that's crazy. At the age of 12, he started building electronic toys. And then he goes on to basically create, the modern day color TV, right? Now we've gotten a lot different since then. TVs are what I believe now are LED, liquid crystal display, or no, LCD, liquid crystal display. Basically, they just have like this crystal. You shoot current and electricity at it, and it makes different colors. Wildly different from what this was, but at the time, when you think about it, crazy that you were able to invent color and create a whole different field of video capture, Not even just that, but like you had to invent a whole new camera system. You had to invent a whole new like the stories, like we're all familiar with The Wizard of Oz, like the first color movie ever. We saw how it blew everybody's mind, and we have Guillermo to thank for that. So shout out Guillermo. Next, someone I found pretty interesting, Luis E. Miramontes, and he is the inventor of the contraceptive pill. One of his most notable influences was his aunt Maria Dolores Cardenas, who served in Pancho Villa's army. She instilled a love of science in Luis and encouraged him to pursue it as a career. Miramontes went on to attend the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico to study chemistry and chemical engineering. At the time, Syntex began to, this is the company he was working at after he graduated college, obviously. They were working on this hormone progesterone as a form of birth control, which in large doses was injected in order to be effective. But in order to overcome this, him and his mentors developed a synthetic form of progesterone, which they named, and also forgive me, chemistry is not my specialty whatsoever at all, norethisterone. This is known as progestin. And importantly, this is one of the first types of oral contraceptives that was made, and it was actually 8 times more effective than what was being used at the time. Miramontes and his other 2 co-workers, this is Italian, so I'm just going to say Di Gerasi and Rosenkreutz, are all listed as co-inventors in the 1956 patent. Next up, we're going to talk about the ballpoint pen. This is actually a little bit of a nerd thing for me, but I exclusively write in pen. I never write in pencil. And so when I found out that Laszlo Josef Bidio invented it, it was interesting. Because at the time, back in the day, they were using feather quills. It would make a mess, actually. And an issue that they didn't really use in their ink was it wasn't oil-based. And so when they would write, a lot of the times, the ink that they would be using would basically seep through the paper. But Laszlo invented this ballpoint pen that would allow you to keep the ink in the writing. So in the ballpoint pen, right, you wouldn't have to keep a separate set of ink. You would just need the pen, which is insane at the time because, they're just keeping ink everywhere. You got to dip it. I'd like to think they were writing with feathers at the time. They probably still were if I'm thinking about it now, because this is when the ballpoint pen was invented, so they probably were writing with, feathers. But what's ingenious about this is that the ballpoint pen functions as a ball that is inside a cone. Keeping the ball suspended is a super thick ink. As you write, you're essentially making the ball roll, and it releases the ink through the ball. Really interesting. We're going to talk about CAPTCHA codes next, and this was invented by Dr. Louis von Ahn. He is a pioneer of the CAPTCHAs, which is, those strings of those characters that, you have to do every time you open an email. You have to do anything internet related to make sure you're not a robot. It's pretty interesting reading his story. I'm just gonna take a few quotes from this article I read. But he finds the technology success a mixed blessing. At first, I was feeling quite proud of myself, says Von Ahn, a 2006 MacArthur Genius Grant recipient who created CAPTCHAs, an acronym for Completely Automated Public Turing Test, to tell computers and humans apart, for Yahoo in 2000 to thwart automated email account registration, a tool of spammers. But then I was feeling bad, because every time you solve a CAPTCHA, you waste 10 seconds. And then he says this, which is kind of insane when you think about like the internet and how he thinks about like the quote unquote waste of time, right? He says, people around the world solve an estimated 60 million CAPTCHAs every day, adding up to more than 150,000 wasted hours, which is kind of crazy as a creator to say I've single-handedly wasted this much time for people, but also shout out. My last and final pick is a man of a long story, a Mexican revolutionary, and one of the most dangerous minds I think I've come across in my research of things. Victor Ochoa. Now, he has invented a lot of things. What made me pick him at first was the electric brake, but then it was when I read his Smithsonian profile. I knew that this podcast was going to be 15 minutes of me talking about safety and all these other guys, and then possibly the last 15 minutes would be me talking about Victor Ochoa. Now, let's get started. I'm going to read through some of his Smithsonian profile, and I'm just going to let you and me become equally as deranged as this man. Ochoa, whose middle name, Leighton, was born in 1850 in Ojinaga, Mexico, of Spanish and Scotch ancestry. Ben Leighton was Ochoa's grandfather. He was a captain in the Federal Army and settled on the Ochoa's family property. He remodeled an old Spanish mission into a fort when the government took it over. It was named Fort Leighton, and it was located about 3 miles east of Presidio and 5 miles west of Presidio is the village of Ochoa Ville. Ochoa's father was Juan Ochoa, who had a large number of lumber mills in Fort Davis and a large stand of timber in the mountains. He and 20 of his men were ambushed by Apaches. Victor Ochoa and his brother Esteban were boys and were traveling with Juan when the ambush occurred. Now, that's kind of crazy to think about. That's a really interesting thing to just bring up in the Smithsonian, but, that's a part of his history. As a boy, he was attacked by Apaches. Ochoa, in 1921, invents the adjustable wrench, so shout out. Basically, he was able to turn pipes, nuts, and bolts with it. Nothing super run-of-the-mill, but this is where I start reading things, and this is where things start becoming insane. Okay, so here we go. Victor L. Ochoa then tries to lead a revolution against the Mexican government. He then gets a price of $50,000 set upon his head to be delivered dead or alive to Porfirio Diaz, the president of Mexico. Mr. Ochoa was a revolutionist who sought to overthrow the rule of Mexico's chief executive in the early 90s. He was arrested in Texas and served 3 years at Crow Hill as a political prisoner. Every effort was made by President Diaz to secure his extradition, but President Cleveland refused to sign papers on the ground that political crimes are not extraditable. How ironic is that now? He then picked, and this is what got him in trouble, right? He picked a band of several hundred men about him and started a revolt that stirred the entirety of the republic. During one of his marches, he was caught in the mountain fastness by Diaz's soldiers and hemmed in on all sides. He saw all of his men put up a gallant fight, but outnumbered, they fell one by one until Mr. Ochoa alone survived, which is kind of crazy because, again, he's an inventor, so he's coming up with this ratchet, and then he'll go and read a revolution and go to jail, and then he'll basically invent something else or become the president of the International Airship Company. Oh, by the way, he does that. He becomes a president of an international company while in jail, or either before he goes to jail or while in jail. Here's where things get a little bit more interesting. He tries to fake his own death. I'm going to say it again. He fakes his own death in an attempt to get that $50,000 reward. This is where I was talking about earlier, right? Ochoa, who is now the president of the International Airship Committee or Company of Paterson, New Jersey, was believed to be dead in an asylum in Newark in 1859, following his release from Kings County Prison in Brooklyn, in which he had spent a 2.5-year sentence for violating the United States neutrality laws and attempting to smuggle arms across the Rio Grande River to his army then operating in Chihuahua, which is so interesting. But what's so funny is that he then gives out the news himself to people because the Mexican government, again, had his, like, they had the bounty on his head, but he was like, I'm gonna fake my death and get this money. Of course, they didn't give him the money, but it's so that's so interesting. That's such an interesting life to just live. He invents the I'm sorry, give me a minute. He invents an adjustable wrench, an electric brake. My favorite invention that I think I've seen so far on this list, the Ochoa plane. The Ochoa plane functioned as an ornithopter, right? If you need a reference, think of, if you've ever seen Dune, it's those little helicopters with the wings on the side. He attempted to build one of these, flew it off, didn't work. That's as much as I could find on the Ochoa plane. It's just this guy, man. He's funny. I kind of want to do more research on his life and make a whole thing about this guy because it's so interesting, just seeing this guy's life is just very interesting. But also just looking at how a lot of them have them by my list of people that I picked, they all kind of grew into STEM. It kind of ties back to what I was talking about earlier in the diversity of STEM, where like we get these great inventions because we have these individuals at the right time at the right place with the right people, obviously. In the case of like Guillermo, where he builds the color TV because, he's playing with his toys. That speaks volumes about how we can introduce, the future of STEM, to it. We can give them toys they can build. We can give them, just better role models in general, because if I'm being honest, we have about, I think I want to say we have a few astronauts. I was originally going to put him in here, but it was this is when I started finding other people that stood out to me that I picked these guys. But we have a few astronauts, and, if we can just get more notoriety to the Latino community, we can definitely have more people go into STEM. And I think that's going to be everything today, guys. I had a wonderful time talking and yapping with y'all. Have a wonderful time. Good night.